Hi, I'm Melissa, and today I'm going to be talking to you about rust. First, what is rust? The term rust can refer to all iron oxides, but it is usually used to mean common red oxide or red rust. All metals experience corrosion and have oxides, but rust only occurs on iron and its alloys like steel. Rust forms through oxidation, which is a scientific reaction that occurs when iron is exposed to water and oxygen for a prolonged period of time. Rusting is accelerated by electrolytes, like salt in salt water. Rust forms anywhere that iron is exposed to water and oxygen, but is much more abundant near sources of constant water. In doing this research, I looked for examples of rust, and here in San Jose I only found rust in places where metal had been exposed due to wear, as seen in this bottom picture, which is a gate door where the paint has been chipped away. On a trip to Tiburon, a city that sits on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, everything was rusted. This metal pipe in the top picture was tall and not likely worn down by human interaction, but yet it is still very heavily rusted from the constant water exposure. There are 4 ways in which rust corrodes metal: uniform, pitting, crevice, and galvanic. Uniform rusting is a uniform reduction of the thickness of a metal surface, and it occurs naturally with only water and oxygen exposure. Pitting is a localized corrosion in which the bulk of the metal surface remains unattacked. This happens when there is a resistance to corrosion, like a protective covering or layers of paint, like in this picture here, where you can see the paint has begun to chip away from the bottom of this pillar and there's spots of rust showing through. Crevice corrosion is also localized and begins in the gaps between 2 conjoining surfaces of similar metals, as in this picture right here. Galvanic corrosion is similar to crevice corrosion, but it occurs when 2 dissimilar types of metals interact. Typically, one metal will rust quicker than the other, as you can see in this picture here, where the washer is pretty much not rusted at all, but the screw there is completely rusted. Tips for rendering rust. When rust forms, it will weaken the integrity of the metal structure, making brittle and flaky edges around the rusting area. Similarly, rust has a flaky, bumpy, and uneven surface, with arranged and thick and thin areas. Rust is dull and is red, orange, and brownish in color. And this is important. It retains the general form of the metal that it grows on. And you can see in these 2 pictures that the rust wraps around the changing metal planes on these corners. And this top picture really clearly shows how the rust falls into the same shadow pattern as the metal table, adopting the same core shadow, shadow side, and even some highlights along the top. Now, some other forms of rust that could also be useful for illustration. The first one, rusticles. These form on metal completely submerged in water and in the presence of certain bacteria. They're bright red in color with black interiors, and they grow away from the metal like icicles, so hence the name rusticles. They grow commonly on sunken ships, and most famously the Titanic, which is completely covered in rusticles. Green rust forms in the absence of oxygen. So, for example, if you have a scene with a metal pillar completely underwater without any source of oxygen, the rust will be green instead of red. Now, patina is not rust, but it is the equivalent of rust for copper. It is the reason that the Statue of Liberty is green, and unlike rust, patina is not destructive and grows only as a surface covering on the metal. It also affects bronze and other similar metals as well as wood, as seen in this picture right here on this bottom side of this wooden boat. Finally, I have some artist examples. Over on this side, I have my bad examples of rust rendering. This top image, the artist used like a blood red hue for the rust, and that's definitely not what you should be picking. It should be more of an orange, brownish, more earth tone color. And in both of these illustrations, the rust is about the same texture as the car, and the rust should definitely be more bumpy and uneven and rough than the smooth metal texture. Over on this side, I have my good renderings. On the bottom here, the texture, color, and unevenness of the rust surface is starting to get a really realistic feel. And here, it's a much looser painting, but you can see that they selectively put rust on some surfaces and not other ones, making the city feel like it's made out of different materials and like this is accurately rusting, as it should be, making a really realistic feel even on a looser painting. So I hope you learned something today, and thank you for listening.